Hello everyone, welcome back to a bit of horror, and this time, we're taking a look at Volume 1 of the 2022 graphic novel Ice Cream Man. There are a total of 12 issues that make up this volume. They are all very loosely tied together, mainly by the mysterious ice cream man named Rick. Some stories were great, others not so much. Before we take a closer look though, be warned, I'm going to be spoiling some of these stories during this discussion. If that's cool, great. If not, now's your time to hop off and join us again once you've read it, and it's worth reading. With that out of the way, let's take a closer look at W. Maxwell Prince's Ice Cream Man, with art by Martin Morazzo and Chris O'Halloran. I think I said those right. Like I said, there are 12 stories in this collection. Some stories are definitely better than others, but they're all decent overall. You might be wondering what makes this a horror anthology, and that all comes down to the antagonist alien entity creature Rick, the titular Ice Cream Man. He seems innocent enough, but we learn quickly that there is something much darker under his sweet exterior. I don't want to spoil 12 individual stories here, but I do want to give you a taste, so I think it would be fun to take a closer look at two that I enjoyed most. This doesn't mean that these two stories are the best or the scariest, they're just the ones that I had the best time reading. And I believe these two stories will give you a sense of the comic's overall mood. The first story I want to take a look at is called Rainbow Sprinkles, which doesn't really have anything to do with what happens in the story, but most of these issues have cute ice cream names. In this issue, a young woman named Karen is reminiscing about the time she met her love, Jim. Things were great, but they soon started using and their lives spiraled out of control. Jim is now lying comatose in their living room, and Karen is leaving to find drugs that she can give to him to wake him up. Essentially, he's going through withdrawals. At the same time as this is happening, we are introduced to an older man and woman. The woman Alice is looking after Phil, who is on painkillers for his arthritis. Alice is preparing to take Phil to an appointment, but Phil is kind of a dick since he needs more medication. He's also an addict as well. When we return to Karen though, she's walking and she hears music coming from an ice cream truck. There's no one in the ice cream truck, so she steals it and she drives away. While driving, Karen crashes into Alice's car while she's taking Phil to the appointment, and she kills Phil in the process. When Karen crawls out of the smashed ice cream truck, she sees that Alice is still alive, so she shoots the woman, then she flees the scene. She makes it back to the house and the ice cream man is sitting in the chair in her living room. He gives Karen some kind of magical special drug. He tells her that it's a drug unlike anything she's ever felt before, but he also tells her there is only enough for one person. She can either use it or give it to Jim, which will save him. Karen, of course, takes the drug herself and immediately overdoses. In a horrific twist, the police arrive and resuscitate Jim, and he survives. This is the kind of tragedy that you can expect to see in these little tales in Ice Cream Man. What I liked about this story was how real and raw that it was. Karen is a villain of this story, but she's also a victim in a world that marginalizes individuals that suffer from drug addiction. I like the parallels that were drawn between the drug addiction behavior of Karen and those of Phil. Phil is addicted and acts out as well. Remember, he is really mean to Alice, who's just trying to take care of him. But we're supposed to sympathize with him while hating Karen at the same time. And don't get me wrong, Karen is a terrible person, but she was good and acted good until she became addicted and needed help that she never received, ultimately leading to her murdering Alice. The role of Rick in this story is subtle, which I appreciated. He may have orchestrated the whole thing, or at least that's what the story implies, but he ultimately leaves the choice to save Jim with Karen, who chooses to use the drug on herself instead. Jim's life is never the same after the incident, which really illustrates that there is no happy ending for anybody involved. This is a dark story, and one that hits close to home for me, and I'm sure it does with many others as well. I have family that suffers from drug addiction, and I see them reflected in many of the actions that Karen takes in the story, even though it's so short. It really influences my perceptions of her. It isn't until the shooting where she really loses herself and commits an act that she cannot recover from. By shooting Alice, she essentially takes her own life at the same time. Okay, and I know that's really heavy stuff, so let's move on from this darker story into something much brighter. Let's take a look at a story named Strange Neapolitan. In this case, the name actually does hint at what the story is about. I really enjoyed this story. It was by far my favorite in the whole volume. What's so unique about Strange Neapolitan is that there are 3 separate stories being told at the same time, in 3 distinct colors, hence the name. At the start of the story, a man asks Rick for 3 scoops of ice cream. It's simple enough. Rick gives this cone to the man, and the man walks away. At this point though, the man's story splits into 3 separate timelines, represented by the 3 colors that I mentioned earlier. In one story, the man is walking away and he bumps into a woman. They fall in love and they ultimately have a child, and things get really dark from here. Unfortunately, the child tragically dies really young. The woman grows distant from the man. She becomes addicted to drugs and alcohol, similar to the previous story. And her and the man's relationship is never the same. It's another tragedy. In the second story, things are a little bit different. The man's walking away when he finds an injured puppy. He takes the puppy in and he heals it. And this is a much happier feeling already. The man and the dog get really close. It isn't long though before the man starts to see lost puppy signs with a phone number on it, and instead of returning the dog to its proper owner, he decides he's going to keep it. He takes the dog and they go to a cabin in the mountains where they grow old together, away from everybody. I'm not really sure why he jumps all the way to becoming a hermit, but that's what he does. This is honestly the happiest of the three stories, even though there seems to be a melancholy feeling of the man hiding out in the cabin growing old alone. In the final story, I'm not going to talk too much about. It's the weirdest but the most visually appealing, I guess. The man is walking away when he finds an egg, a normal bird's egg. He gives it to an animal shelter and it hatches. As he's leaving the animal shelter though, he's hit over the head and he's kidnapped. He's taken to this room where he's tied up to a chair and he's tortured, pretty violently. An egg hatches from his chest and he's left to die where he lies. It doesn't really have a story at all. Nothing else happens in the story, but it is visually interesting. And I think that really sums up a lot of the issues in this comic. There's not a lot of substance to many of the individual stories in this collection. However, together they create a sense of helplessness and unease in a city that's plagued by violence. Things are off in the world of Ice Cream Man, essentially. At the end of the volume, we're given 3 stories that explain the background of Ice Cream Man, as well as the mysterious cowboy named Caleb who's been confronting Rick throughout the volume. Both Rick and Caleb are ancient elf-like creatures with magic from a different dimension. This is a weird way for the story to go after what we've been getting so far. The first tale of these 3 takes place in a western-like world that has begun to fall apart. Caleb is killing spiders, which are Rick's creations. Overall, Rick is a kind of sadistic monster, preferring to do what he wants rather than listen to their uncle who watches over he and Rick. The uncle kind of creates the rules here. Rick is related to Caleb in some way, but they don't particularly like each other. As they're packing up and getting ready to leave their universe, Rick kills his uncle. This means he no longer has to answer to anybody. He heads for the new universe, which eventually leads him to Earth. I guess, or it's presumably Earth. It doesn't really say, but I think it's pretty clearly our world. He causes mayhem and kills for fun in our world, which is where the stories throughout this collection come from. There is never a conclusion to the story, at least not in this volume. Caleb never defeats Rick. I'm not even sure if he could, honestly. Instead, we're just left with one final tale, a futuristic story that seems to parody movies like Alien and 2001: A Space Odyssey. In this final story, a man named Noah is flying a ship with the letters ARC, which stand for Archival Recivilization Capsule, on its hull. He is looking for a new world to seed with life. This life comes in the form of data that is stored on a large hard drive on the ship. While traveling, Noah's ship is struck by a bunch of meteors with spider-like creatures on them. A giant spider makes it onto the ship a la Alien, and it crashes onto a nearby moon. There is a human signal coming from a cave on that moon, and Noah goes to investigate. Inside the cave, Noah finds Rick waiting on this throne with spider-like bones coming from it. He's attacked by Rick and killed. Rick uses Noah's ship to escape from the moon's surface as Caleb watches as the ship flies away. And that brings us to the end of this interesting little horror-ish comic. I don't think this graphic novel is scary by any sense of the word, but it does deal with some intense themes. The juxtaposition of a depressing world and a happy Ice Cream Man creates an interesting mood with appealing visuals. With that being said, I don't think it goes far enough, often enough, for many of these stories. For the most part, Rick is just set dressing for panels where he stands and smiles, and that's about it. And while they look cool, he doesn't really serve a purpose. The fact he is an Ice Cream Man has no effect on the story. He could have easily been a clown or anything else you would find in this type of story, and nothing would have changed in any meaningful way. As far as stories go, I wasn't particularly drawn to any of them with the exception of the Neapolitan one. I don't know if I've ever seen a graphic novel tell 3 separate stories at the exact same time. If you have, please let me know though. I thought it was great. I would love to see other horror comics adopt this concept into something more complex and run with it. What's here in Ice Cream Man is good, but I can't help feeling like it's just a taste of what it could be. Who knows, maybe Volume 2 has what I'm looking for. Even though I didn't enjoy every story, I think you'll still enjoy the graphic novel overall. I thought the artwork was fantastic, and I enjoyed the weird parodies the story offers. The whole experience is like weird little sketch horror pieces. And alright, I think that about sums up my thoughts. I hope you all enjoyed talking about Ice Cream Man with me, and I'm really looking forward to picking up Volume 2 sometime in the future. If that's something you're interested, just let me know. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next story.